I always knew Uncle Frank would try to steal our family business. Even as a child, I saw the way he looked at my father's success. The barely concealed envy whenever Dad announced another record quarter. What I didn't know was how far he'd go or how thoroughly I'd make him regret it. Martinez Construction had been my father's life's work. He built it from a single truck and a toolbox into a $50 million company that handled major contracts across 3 states. While Uncle Frank spent his time chasing get-rich-quick schemes and complaining about his bad luck, Dad was laying foundations, both literal and metaphorical. "Your father got all the breaks," Uncle Frank would tell me at family gatherings, bourbon in hand. "Must be nice to be the golden boy." He never mentioned how Dad had worked 18-hour days while Frank was borrowing money for his latest failed investment. I grew up on construction sites, learning every aspect of the business. By 16, I could read blueprints better than most project managers. At 22, fresh out of business school, I was managing my first development project. But to Uncle Frank and his sons, my cousins Michael and Peter, I was just little Isabella, playing at being a contractor. They didn't know I was also quietly earning my MBA at night, studying finance and corporate law while they assumed I was just Dad's spoiled daughter learning a family business. Then came the heart attack. I found Dad in his office late one night, slumped over quarterly reports. The doctors called it a warning sign, his body demanding he slow down. He needed rest, rehabilitation, time away from the stress of running a major construction company. That's when Uncle Frank made his move. "We need to discuss the future of Martinez Construction," he announced at the emergency family meeting, barely 2 days after Dad was released from the hospital. The conference room felt smaller than usual, cramped with tension and unspoken agendas. I sat quietly, watching Frank position himself at the head of the table, Dad's seat. My mother, still exhausted from hospital vigils, looked uncertain. My older brother Alex, who had never shown any interest in construction beyond his guaranteed paycheck, was texting under the table. "Carlos," Frank addressed my father, who sat pale but alert in a corner chair, "you need to think about succession, about strong leadership during your recovery." His pause made it clear he didn't expect much recovery to happen. "The business is fine," Dad started to say, but Frank cut him off. "Is it? Fourth quarter projections are down. The Riverside project is behind schedule. The Sullivan contract is shaky." He spread his hands on the polished conference table. "The company needs experienced leadership, someone who understands the industry, who has connections." "Like you?" I couldn't help asking. The sarcasm in my voice made my cousin shift uncomfortably. Frank's smile was cold. "Actually, yes. I've already spoken to several board members. They agree changes need to be made." "You what?" My mother's voice cracked with disbelief. "It's just business," Frank said smoothly. "Nothing personal. But let's be realistic. Carlos needs time to recover. Alex has his own interests." He glanced at my brother, who had finally looked up from his phone. "And Isabella. Well, this isn't the kind of business a young woman should have to worry about." The room erupted in overlapping voices. My mother was crying. Alex was demanding to know what connections Frank had actually made. My cousins were smirking, already imagining their new positions of power. I stayed silent, watching Dad. His face had gone gray again, but his eyes met mine. In that look, I saw something that broke my heart, fear. Not for himself, but for the company he'd built, for the hundreds of employees who depended on it, for the legacy he'd worked so hard to create. "I have the proxy votes," Frank announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "By this time next week, I'll be CEO of Martinez Construction. Don't worry, family will still be taken care of." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Small salaries, of course, nothing excessive. We'll need to cut costs." Dad started to stand, but I put a hand on his shoulder. "When's the shareholder meeting?" I asked quietly. "Friday, 10 a.m., Frank replied, looking surprised I'd even asked. "Though it's really just a formality at this point." I nodded, already pulling out my phone. "Thank you, Uncle Frank. That's very helpful." "Isabella," he said condescendingly, "I know this is upsetting, but business is business. You'll understand someday." I looked up from my phone and smiled. "Oh, I understand business perfectly, Uncle Frank. Better than you think." The next 3 days were a blur of activity, most of it carefully hidden from my family's view. While Frank was measuring Dad's office for new furniture, I was in meetings he knew nothing about. While my cousins were planning their new executive positions, I was making calls that would change everything. Wednesday night, my phone rang. It was Mr. Chen from the investment firm. "It's done," he said simply. "The paperwork will be ready tomorrow morning." I thanked him and hung up, staring at the spreadsheet on my laptop. 6 months of careful planning, of quiet investments and strategic moves, all leading to this moment. I'd seen Frank's takeover attempt coming long before Dad's heart attack. I just hadn't expected to have to move so quickly. Thursday morning, I visited Dad in his home office. He was reviewing project files, still trying to keep things running despite doctor's orders to rest. "Papa," I said softly, "do you trust me?" He looked up, his eyes tired but still sharp. "With my life, Maija. You know that." I placed a folder on his desk. "Then I need you to sign these, and I need you to not ask questions until tomorrow's meeting." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded and reached for his pen. That night, Uncle Frank called. His voice was smug, practically dripping with false sympathy. "Isabella, sweetheart, I hope there are no hard feelings about tomorrow. Change is hard, I know, but it's for the best. I'll make sure you keep your project manager position, with supervision, of course." "That's very thoughtful, Uncle Frank," I replied, watching the city lights from my apartment window. "I look forward to tomorrow's meeting. It should be educational." "That's the spirit. See, business doesn't have to be ugly." I hung up and poured myself a glass of wine, thinking about the look that would be on his face in less than 12 hours. Friday morning, I dressed carefully in my sharpest suit, the one I usually saved for major client meetings. The boardroom was already full when I arrived. Frank and his sons near the head of the table, board members and major shareholders filling the other seats. Dad sat quietly in the corner, Mom beside him holding his hand. Frank stood, spreading his arms like a conductor about to begin a symphony. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, recent events have made it clear that Martinez Construction needs new leadership. I have here the proxy votes." He started reaching for his briefcase. "Actually, Uncle Frank," I interrupted, "before you continue, I think we should review the current shareholder structure." He frowned. "That's unnecessary. I have the votes." "The votes you arranged last week?" I smiled, pulling out my own folder. "Those were based on outdated information. Maybe we should discuss who actually owns Martinez Construction now." The boardroom fell silent as I opened my folder and began distributing documents to each person at the table. Uncle Frank's face flickered between confusion and annoyance. "What is this?" he demanded, snatching up his copy. "The current shareholder register of Martinez Construction," I replied calmly. "Updated as of yesterday. You'll notice some significant changes." Frank's eyes scanned the document. I watched as his expression shifted from irritation to disbelief to something close to panic. His hands began to shake. This is impossible," he stammered. "Is something wrong, Uncle Frank?" I asked innocently. "You seem surprised that someone else might understand how to acquire controlling interest in a company." Michael, my cousin, grabbed the paper from his father's hands. "What the hell? Where did these shares come from?" I stood up, commanding the room's attention. "Let me explain. For the past 6 months, I've been quietly buying shares through various investment vehicles. Some from minor shareholders, some through carefully structured deals with investment firms. As of yesterday morning, I control 51% of Martinez Construction." The boardroom erupted. Board members were flipping through the documents, verifying the numbers. My mother was staring at me with her mouth open. Dad was smiling. "You can't do this," Frank shouted, his face turning red. "These transactions weren't approved." Actually, I picked up another document. They were all perfectly legal. "You see, Uncle Frank, while you were busy courting board members with golf games and expensive dinners, I was studying securities law and corporate governance. Every purchase was properly registered, every transaction documented." Peter, my other cousin, jumped to his feet. "This is a trick. She's bluffing." I nodded to Mr. Chen, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. He stood and introduced himself to the room. "I represent Kingston Investment Partners. We can confirm that all transactions listed are legitimate and properly recorded." Frank slumped in his chair, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. All his careful planning, all his backroom deals undone by the niece he'd never taken seriously. But you're just a project manager," he whispered. No, Uncle Frank. I'm a project manager with an MBA in corporate finance and enough business sense to see your takeover attempt coming months ago. I turned to address the entire room. I know some of you supported my uncle's bid for control, believing he could provide stronger leadership during my father's recovery. Let me tell you what his actual plan was. I clicked a remote, and documents appeared on the boardroom screen. These are records of shell companies Frank has been setting up. He planned to divert contracts to these entities, essentially stealing business from Martinez Construction while extracting maximum profit for himself. He would have stripped this company bare within a year. The board members began murmuring angrily. Frank's face had gone from red to white. "You've been investigating me," he choked out. "Of course. Did you really think I wouldn't protect my father's legacy?" I turned to my cousins. "Michael, Peter, you might want to distance yourselves from your father's activities. The SEC tends to frown on corporate fraud schemes." I scrambled away from Frank as if he were contagious. "Now," I continued, "let's discuss the future of Martinez Construction. Dad needs time to recover, that much is true. But this company doesn't need new ownership. It needs experienced leadership that understands both the industry and modern business practices." I walked to the head of the table, my father's seat, never Frank's. As majority shareholder, I'm appointing myself CEO, effective immediately. Dad will serve as chairman of the board, providing strategic guidance while focusing on his health. "You?" Frank laughed desperately. "You're too young, too inexperienced. I'm 28 years old," I cut him off. "The same age Dad was when he founded this company. I've worked every position from laborer to project manager. I have an MBA from Northwestern and 6 years of hands-on experience. But most importantly, I have something you never had, Uncle Frank, genuine love for this company and everything it stands for." I turned to the board members. "You've all received my 5-year strategic plan. It includes expansion into green building technologies, modernization of our project management systems, and a profit-sharing program for long-term employees. Any questions?" The room was silent. Then old Mr. Sullivan, our longest-serving board member, started to clap. Others joined in, the applause growing until it filled the room. Through tears, I saw my mother beaming with pride and Dad giving me a subtle thumbs up. "This meeting is adjourned," I announced. "Uncle Frank, security will escort you out. Don't worry about cleaning out your office, we already have." As Frank was led away, still protesting, Dad walked up and hugged me tight. "You knew," he whispered, "about Frank's plan?" "For months. I've been preparing for this since I first noticed him quietly buying shares last year." "No," Dad smiled. "I mean, you knew I gave you those first shares when you were 16 not just as a gift, but as a test. To see if you'd understand their value, if you'd learn how to use them wisely." I hugged him back. "Of course I knew, Papa. You taught me that everything in business is a lesson if you're smart enough to learn from it." The next few weeks were intense. I implemented the changes I'd planned, modernizing systems that had grown outdated, introducing new technologies that would keep us competitive. Some old guard managers resigned, uncomfortable with taking orders from a young woman. I replaced them with talented professionals who cared more about competence than gender or age. Uncle Frank tried to fight back, threatening lawsuits and claiming family betrayal. But his own paper trail of planned fraud killed any sympathy he might have found. His social media rants about his ungrateful niece only made him look more pathetic. 3 months later, I sat in my office, previously Dad's office, reviewing quarterly reports. Our numbers were up 25% from the previous year. The Riverside project was back on schedule. The Sullivan contract was secure, and we had just won the biggest green building contract in the company's history. A knock on my door interrupted my work. It was Alex, my brother, looking uncharacteristically serious. "Hey sis," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "Got a minute?" "For you?" "Always." He sat down, fiddling with his expensive watch. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time I actually learned the business, not just collecting a paycheck, but really understanding it." "Think you could teach me?" I smiled, remembering all the times he'd mocked my dedication to learning every aspect of construction. "Start Monday, 6 a.m. sharp. Wear work boots." He groaned but nodded. "Thanks, Isabella. And I'm sorry I never took you seriously before. What you did, it was amazing." "It wasn't amazing," I corrected him. "It was business. But if you're willing to learn, really learn." I'll teach you everything Dad taught me, and a few things I figured out on my own. That evening, I visited Dad at home. He was looking better, the color back in his face, the spark back in his eyes. We sat in his garden, sharing a bottle of wine. I got a call from Frank's wife today, he said. He's taken a job as a sales manager at a small construction supply company in Nevada. I sipped my wine. Good, far away from here. You know, when I started this company, I dreamed of passing it on to my children. I just never expected that your daughter would end up running it, I teased. That either of my children would love it as much as I do, he corrected me. But you proved me wrong. You didn't just save the company from Frank, you made it better. I looked at my father, the man who had taught me everything about business and life, who had trusted me with his legacy even when others doubted. No, Papa, I said softly, we made it better. We always were a good team. He raised his glass. To Martinez Construction, past, present, and future. I clinked my glass against his. To family, the real kind, the ones who build you up instead of tear you down. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, Uncle Frank was probably still cursing my name, still believing he deserved what I'd earned. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was sitting right here, a father and daughter who had built something remarkable together, who understood that true success comes not from scheming and betrayal, but from hard work, integrity, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Martinez Construction wasn't just a company anymore. It was proof that sometimes the best person for the job isn't the loudest or the most confident, but the one who quietly prepares, who learns everything they can, who takes nothing for granted. And sometimes, just sometimes, they're the person nobody saw coming until it was too late.